Our rules are simple, but the challenge is great. No shoulder pets, tames that can be carried, or typical boss dinos allowed. That means no Rexes, Therazinos, or any other dinos people normally use in these fights. Equipped with level 150 saddles across the board, our 19 contenders will be backed by the commanding presence of a loyal Uranus providing that extra boost. No Overseer because the movement speed required to get through the tech cave, then chase the Overseer during the fight would shorten our list by a lot. It's important to note that tames in this series aren't typically used during boss battles because of the amount of mutations you need to make them competitive, but all of the dinos competing will have around 23,000 health and 1200% melee. This will give them all a fair shot at defeating at least one of the Guardians. It won't always be feasible to reach these stats depending on the dinos we're using, but I'll let you know the amount of mutations and levels it took in order to get there. You can make the call on if the juice is worth the squeeze based off whatever server settings you're using. A passing score is earned if the dino emerges victorious in the boss battle, showcasing its prowess. A failing score doesn't imply that the dino lacks the potential to triumph. It simply means that at this stage, it may not be the most practical choice. Now let's take a look at our competitor and get into the battles. The Mammoth. You can find this noble beast in the frozen north on most maps, and they're usually in small groups fighting for their lives amongst the tundra's fierce creatures. These behemoths pack quite the punch. They have a massive health pool, and they're typically used to only farm wood, thatch, and berries. To reach the stats in this challenge, we only needed 20 mutations and 53 levels. So keep in mind, you can easily exceed these stats by a ton, and have better results against the bosses than you see here. Without further ado, please enjoy this frustrating display of herding chaos. Gathering the mammoths around the obelisk was a chore in itself. Their collision is ridiculous. It's probably the worst in the game. This problem extended into the beginning of every fight. It was always difficult to mount the Uranus, and moving the mammoths out of the way was horrible. Once we got the Broodmother finally surrounded, it was evident that the mammoths probably shouldn't be considered an underdog. They hit pretty hard, and their intimidation buff decreases damage that enemies dish out. I could never get all 19 mammoths close enough to get 100% damage output, but we kicked the Broodmother's ass anyway and got our first pass. Getting 19 mammoths around a boss was impossible, but I also struggled with getting 19 mammoths into the fight to begin with. A few of these battles I only had between 16 and 18 mammoths. Megapithecus was tricky because you need to position your mammoths far back in the trees in order to get the Megapithecus close enough to be surrounded. As you can see here, it's almost impossible to surround him, and if you do it on the path, then you're just asking for mammoths to be punched into the abyss. We learn as we go, and Gamma Megapithecus is dropped pretty easily. Heading into the Gamma Dragon fight, we run into our first major snag. Surrounding the dragon wasn't too hard, but the mammoth's slow movement speed and clunky collision could potentially prove troublesome against the faster alpha bosses. The snag we had is what you see here at the spawn point. Multiple mammoths were rendered useless, and this would actually happen every time I fought the dragon. We got the Gamma Dragon down to 50% health relatively quickly, but as you can kind of tell, there was no dodging the attacks like we were able to do with smaller creatures in other episodes. The mammoths would take full damage every fight, but for the Gamma bosses it really wasn't an issue, and we snagged our third pass in a row. We popped up the blue portal and prepared to head into the Beta Broodmother arena. We had more of the same frustrations trying to move the mammoth around the map, and we actually only came into this fight with less than 19 mammoths. The Beta Broodmother was pinned down relatively easily, and it truly would have been an epic ass-whooping if the mammoths could manage to squeeze in close enough to get some more hits in the game. The mammoths are super strong, and we could easily come into these fights with double the health. There's definitely better options out there, because these mammoths really are just too clunky and big for their own good. Either way, we still dropped the Beta Broodmother and earned our fourth pass for the day. The Beta Megapithecus fight was our standard run that we have when facing this gentle giant. I struggled to maneuver again, and we wound up fighting pretty close to the choke point on the stone walkway. I didn't try to get closer to the tree line for long because he was all over us, so I sent the sluggish herd in, hoping that a few up front that touched him could pull it off. Coming into this episode, I was blown away at how much health and damage these guys potentially have, but wondered why no one uses them for boss fights. I think I figured out why. All of this is not to say to not use the mammoths, because I actually feel like they would make a good addition to any fighting force. I'll touch on it more in a bit, but for now, we crushed the Beta Ape and earned us another pass. I've said it before, and it holds true during this fight. The Beta Dragon is typically where the wheels fall off, because this tends to be a true make-or-break-it test. We started with collision frustrations that took a long time to sort out, with half our mammoths still stuck at the terminal when the Beta Dragon engaged us. I attempted to hop on some of the mammoths to get them to break up, and the whole squad was just getting cooked alive, with one mammoth still stuck on the force field wall. This fight actually took forever because the mammoths could take the hits from the beta dragon, but they just couldn't dish out enough damage. I think a male-female pair of mammoths would absolutely boost any dino squad because they have good damage output and their debuff works against the bosses and their minions. Of course, increasing the amount of species that you bring into a fight always extends your prep time by a boatload because you need to find the correct saddle blueprints to even give these guys a fighting chance. Eventually, I had lost half my mammoth squad, but was able to get the one stuck at the spawn point into the fight. I didn't have many left, and the beta dragon still had almost 50% health left, and we were still losing mammoths. At this point, I should have just called the fight, but I wanted to see if I could get the team in a position where the last few could still pull off a W. Their damage was sure high enough to do something like that, but eventually it was just me and one other left. I was losing health at a rapid rate, and with one last fire breath, I was turned into a succulent morsel for the dragon to snack on, and we were handed our first fail. I fired up the red portal ready to rebound and kick the alpha broodmother's teeth in. We performed fairly well against the beta broodmother, even with some of our mammoths stuck at spawn, but this time we were fully loaded and ready to go. Except for this guy. I don't know what happened with this mammoth. He got stuck in the mesh and he wound up moonwalking around this pillar until he eventually died. Once I got back around to the fight, I didn't believe my eyes. Mammoths were dropping left and right, but I still had a handful left and the broodmother was down to a quarter of her health. With 4 mammoths left, I engaged the broodmother with a UD for one final push. That final push ultimately failed, and when it came down to just me and her, I decided to do the noble thing and let her have a taste, which means we get another fail on the board. For our final fight of the evening, we have one last hope. The alpha Megapithecus typically isn't that hard, and if we could get the positioning correct, then we could definitely pull this off. Before I knew it, Alpha Monkey was all up in my shit, but I was fortunate enough to have the correct positioning, and I had him surrounded with juicy mammoth meat in no time. I was able to almost get him fully surrounded, and trust me, this is a huge deal because of how much of a pain in the ass it is to maneuver these guys. His health was dropping quickly, and all I had to do was sit back and enjoy the show. Look at this scene. The big man stood no chance with this amount of firepower being shoved in his face. The mammoths were able to cap off the challenge with a solid and respectable win over the alpha Megapithecus and put our final pass on the board. We are now 6 episodes deep in the Underdog boss battle series, and I have been having a ton of fun making these and interacting with everybody. I hope you found this episode enjoyable, so please feel free to hit me up in the comments, give me any feedback that you may have, or let me know what dinos you'd like to see in this series. Your support means a lot to me, so please like and subscribe and watch this community grow. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.